And welcome everyone to Creators Corner. My name is Chris Barrows, and I'm really excited to be back. Creators Corner has been away for a little bit, and here we are once again. It's been about a month and a half since I last recorded. I want to quickly apologize. I was dealing with some health things regarding migraines, and I am back, able to kind of produce consistently, and I got to be able to do that to do this channel. So glad to start with just such a wonderful guest. And Ed is here, and you may know Ed from his work on such fantastic games like Herbaceous. Herbaceous Sprouts are some of the ones I've played more recently. Floriferous, is that, did I pronounce that one right?
Yeah. It doesn't matter, but Floriferous is how I would say it.
Yeah. So
that hard to pronounce game names is a way to go, right?
Yeah, and that's the most recent Kickstarter, obviously. So obviously you've been making games since essentially 2012, if I have it correctly, in board game space.
Right.
But let's talk about the origin in board games for you, as I ask everyone on this show, which is, what is your origin in board games? Whether it be playing board games as a kid, whether discovering board games a little bit later in life. Where does it start for you?
Well, as a kid, I certainly was in a family where we played a lot of board games, but these were much more of the traditional set when you're thinking about Scrabble, Trivial Pursuit, Monopoly, Connect Four. What was that? Bakersfield. A couple of the mystery games.
Yep.
It got a little bit outside of the zone, Chinese checkers type of thing, but wasn't sort of the hobbyist board game space. Uno, that whole spectrum, right? And then later on, I was working at a company called Mind Control Software. It's where I ultimately met Thomas Denmark, who I did Unkindness of Ravens with, but also Andrew Leaker, who owned the company. And that space was a bunch of people who played like more traditional board games. So, at that point, you're looking at Catan, Ticket to Ride, Small World as the entry point, but then getting into Torres and Deeper Bang, whole variety of the popular games back then, which would have been 2005 or 6.
Right.
And so, and then from there, growing in terms of interest and different games played and expanding collection and that kind of thing.
So what was it that led you to that initial experience in 2012 where you co-designed Murder of Crows, which, when you look it up, is described as a darkly humorous, fast-playing card game published by Apple.
And it is. Actually, though, it starts at the story about that game is it took 7 years to bring to market. So, in fact, when I was at Mind Control Software, the art director there, Thomas Denmark, he's done a lot of things. In particular, though, he had a game called Dungeoneer with Atlas Games, which was a pretty successful dungeon crawler game back way before people were doing it, or some people were doing it. And he was working on the smaller, more fast-paced game called Murder of Crows, but was struggling with the design. And I was working at, we were working together at Mind Control Software, and he asked me to play it, and I was giving him feedback, and he's like, "Hey, you want to do this with me?" And I said, "Sure." So we got the game design together, and then it has like 50, unique pieces of art. And Thomas spent the next half decade working on it. Excuse me, making the art. So that game actually started and just took a really long time to come out. Also, Liftoff, Get Me Off This Planet, which is the first game that I designed and was released via Pencil First Games via Kickstarter. That was another title that I started, way earlier than it came out. Made a prototype, shipped it to publishers to consider. No one, I got close with Queen Games, but no one actually bit. And then it sort of was in fallow. Then ended up playing it at a game night. Some people were like, "You should kickstart it." Kickstarted manufacturing. So there's this pretty long window of sort of development as those games sort of came to market.
But that's common, because we talk about, whenever I talk to anyone, it might be 5 years, it might be 3 years. I mean, the years vary, the number. Sure. It takes time to develop a game, especially when you think about play testing and all the other pieces. Obviously, you've put out quite a few games since. You do mention Liftoff, Get Me Off This Planet, which ironically was the liftoff for for you and Pencil First.
Sure. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
what was that first Kickstarter experience like with your with this game though? Because I think Kickstarter's evolved so much. I'm really interested in what that first experience was like versus when you go to Kickstarter today.
It's a good question. I mean, I think Kickstarter's evolved. I think a lot of the principles are the same. But the big difference between me then and now was I was completely outside of the board game industry, the board game social space. So at that time, like I didn't even use BGG. Like I wasn't, board gaming wasn't a social online community for me. It was the thing I did with my family or with friends, right? You just went to your game store, you play locally. The idea that there was like not online gaming, but online communities was foreign to me. And so diving into the Kickstarter space was like, I that same group of people that were sort of like, you should do a Kickstarter. One of them was Teal Fristo, and he had at the what's the name of his game company? He did Birds of a Feather and a couple other games, but back then it was Dark. I don't remember the name of the game, but he had just done a game, was about to do a game, and he started introducing me to some folks in sort of that space. And so in about a 3-month period between when I started having the conversation about doing the Kickstarter and launching it, because I had the game, right? I had the prototype. It had it for 3 years. It was like 0 to 60, meeting, getting to know, engaging the community, getting on BGG, and just rapidly, diving in. And a lot of folks at the time were excited about what Liftoff and getting engaged and seeing it. And so it was really all about learning, getting up to speed, learning what to do with a Kickstarter, which again, if you don't know what to do, go look at any representative game and use it as a template, because that's the best way to do it. But do that quickly, as well as engage in the space and meet people. And after that, it was such a big lift. It was such a committed, and at the time I was between jobs, so it was like super full time. It was such a lift that afterwards I looked for and wanted to think of ways to stay connected with the community, engaging with it, because games take so long to make, right? And that's how I started the Gaming with Edo YouTube channel and engaging on the community groups. It was just sort of to be able to create and have content that wasn't not just take a withdrawal, but do community deposits on a more regular basis than a game once every 2 years or once every 3 years. And so now, you don't have the stress of not knowing what to do, but you still have all the sort of product prep and making sure you do it right. But it's nice to know the community and know what's going on and have just a much better sense of it. I mean, because I've done a lot. I mean, I've done like 15 Kickstarters, right? So it's a lot. It's a lot.
I was gonna say you've put together a great collection. I mean, I mentioned a few of them earlier. One I didn't mention, which admittedly I have heard a lot about over this time. There's a bunch of these games, but Skull Hollow. So Skull Hollow is on my want to play list as an example. So Skull Hollow stands out. Herbaceous, which now I find really interesting. Herbaceous has now a variety of options, because you've got Herbaceous, then you had Herbaceous Sprouts, which was my first Herbaceous, by the way, and I enjoyed it.
Oh, interesting. We'll go finish what you're saying, but I'm curious to your...
Yeah. So, and then with that, you also did more recently, and because I want to make sure I highlight this, you also
the pocket edition. Yeah.
The idea of this, because I have my copy. I traveled with it. Yep. And it's great. It's fantastic. You can take it everywhere. I took it with me even on a bachelor party recently, where it got out on the table there. We had a big table. We didn't need that
awesome.
But
yeah.
No, my first was Herbaceous Sprouts, actually. Herbaceous had been told me about a lot, quite a bit.
Sure.
And I actually bought Herbaceous, but then we gifted it. So I didn't ever play it. We gifted it to my son's teacher at the end of the first COVID year of school.
Good gift.
That was our gift. But yeah, so my first one was Sprouts, actually.
Awesome. And so I'm just curious, between Sprouts and Herbaceous, which do you prefer?
What's interesting? I will say I quite like Sprouts as a whole, and I think I often will put Sprouts to the table when we're doing the full game. But the Herbaceous being with the travel size, that's everywhere. Sure. So I think that's equaled it out a little bit. I could play both. It makes me happy.
Sure.
I think I may like. I think I don't know if it's because I played it first, but Sprouts in particular, I just really like some of the mechanics in that game. It definitely has a great feel on the table for me.
Yeah, you have a lot of people sort of. It really depends on what your gaming tastes and style are, which way you lean, right? Like there's more going on in Sprouts, and some people really like going the Sprouts direction, and some like Herbaceous. It's not exclusive, right? They're two different games, but I was just curious because a lot of folks have played Herbaceous first and then went to Sprouts.
No, I was the inverse, but again, that's a family, and I'm interested. How did it come about that you did do the pocket version? Because pocket versions exist. There's obviously, you've got Tiny Epic out there, which everything essentially is small, right? And you've got pocket,
but that's like small, but still packed, right? Like you're not about to like. It's like you're pulling out a 60-minute game when you. That
is very true. But there's definitely pocket games.
Yeah, we didn't invent pocket games, right?
Right. But how did you make the decision, though, to go to a pocket version of it? Because obviously it was a popular game. It was a game that people talked about. But the decision to go pocket is obviously still a clear choice.
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces to that. So one is the answer to your question is pretty specific. Do I have it here? Let me see. I think I should have it somewhere. There it is. So I don't remember a year, but at some point, we were approached by Amatigo to do a French version of Herbaceous, and they did it. And there's some things that they did that I like and I don't like. In particular, they did a folded rules, like, which to me is like awful, but whatever. Anyway, they published this, but most of the time we handle the print for these partners. But in the case of Amatigo, they back in the day I used to do this edition, and so in theirs, it's a smaller box. They don't have the dividers, which I like. Yeah, and even in the pocket edition I kept the dividers. But they have these like Euro poker deck cards. They're not Euro minis. They're not poker cards. They're like, I don't know, minus 20%. And I remember getting it and saying at the time, like, oh, this was cool. But this isn't like a big enough difference from Herbaceous that this would like make sense to do. Like, this is just slightly smaller. But it made me think, but it still works and still looks good. And made me think, like, how small could you go? Like, could you go to mini cards? And the cards are very graphic. And so it sort of like piqued my interest to consider it. But one of the interesting parts of it, and so I started experimenting, and I got like a little print with small, like one print of a small version of it. Like we just did it really quickly. I just talked to my printer. I was like, can you just like shrink the card? Like, we're not going to give you new files. Just like make them fit just to look at it. But one of the things that came up, sorry about turning around here, was Herbaceous still does well for us. It's our best-selling game. We have different, but easily Herbaceous has sold the most units, their best-selling game. And, it's $25. It's got good margin, but the margin on the Pocket Edition is like, basically, the Pocket Edition costs almost as much to manufacture as the main edition, but you just can't sell it for as much, right? Because it's teeny. And so it wasn't really a product that could be released. And so, I mean, on Kickstarter, you could do it, but it isn't a great retail product unless it was like some Target deal where we printed 20,000 units or copies. And so ultimately, what decided to do was we created the edition, but it's actually only available from pencilfirstgames.com. You can't get it from Amazon. You can't get it from a retailer. That's like, I mean, somebody might have bought a couple extra and had it, but pretty much the only place to get it is, especially with no conventions, like we're not even at conventions, right? Is from our website. And so it's sort of an experiment to think about these small editions and this sort of direct to consumer approach. But in a lot of ways, one of the pros and cons about Pencil First Games is, we do what I want to do in a degree. And so like I was interested in having the Pocket Edition and I thought it worked. So let's do it. And so we haven't even done the Kickstarter yet, but we've gone ahead and done this is a prototype of Sunset Over Water Pocket Edition. It's another game we've done. It's a little thicker. It's not quite as slim, but it has more cards. But we had to go through and solve all the bits, making sure to still have the little meeples inside. So, it's meant to be as full an edition, just smaller. And at some point next year, we'll do a Kickstarter for this. So, I think it's an interesting space. I enjoy it. But, at the same time, the cost of goods is a real thing, and the cost of shipping is a real thing these days. And so, some of these things, they're only going to be a couple thousand in the world. They're not going to be like huge print runs, and that's okay. That doesn't bother me.
Yeah. Talking about that, I was wondering, how do you, as really just a smaller production? I mean, you don't have a gigantic team it compared to Asmodee or someone else, right?
Oh, sure, or a team at all, but go on.
Yeah. So how do you approach the challenges that have come up with things like shipping? Because obviously it's been a really challenging year, and I don't know that it's gotten easier. I've talked to some people who've said, no, it's still really tough out there in terms of the price of shipping and even getting a boat to get my stuff over here.
Yeah, I mean, so each project that I work on is with a team of folks, but they are typically, just associated with that project. So a designer or the artist or the graphic designer, we sort of gather up, we make a game, and then sort of the revenue and the Kickstarter sort of funds those developments. From like a company perspective, Jessica, who I think you've interacted with, she's our sales manager, operations manager, anything and everything manager. And she's fantastic, but she's really the only other person who's sort of week over week making sure things get done. We have a sort of a house graphic designer too, Kim, who does a lot, but it's, one of the ways you don't go underwater with all this stuff is you don't have a ton of cost, right? You don't have you have to pay for the product and all that, but like I'm not operating and running a big company with 12 employees and all those things. In fact, I mean, it's really a hobby. I work full-time professionally in video games, right? And so certainly, and thus don't really make any personal money from Pencil First Games. What I get to do is I get to make more games from Pencil First Games. And I get to, have Jessica get paid so that she can do a lot of stuff I don't have time to do because I got other stuff I have to do. So, it's a balance, but the big decision I made was not diving in, right? Like financially. And early on, you think there's going to be this breaking point when you can do this, like with Liftoff and the Kickstarter and early on, but no way. I live in California. It depends on where you live and what your living arrangements are. I've got a family. I've got 2 kids. So, I think part of it is that if I don't want Pencil First Games to not make any money, but as long as it's coming along and the costs are covered, I'm okay. And so if let's just say, for example, at the end of the year, the company was going to clear $20K of revenue of pure profit, and there's the shipping issue, and that $20K becomes $10K, which is, it's that bad. For those who don't know, you're talking about an expense, a line item that used to be $2,500 turned into $25,000, right? So it's just a loss, but that loss isn't stopping me from paying my rent, right? But for other people, it really is. So I think part of it is just keeping this in that hobby space, very jobby sometimes, very, very robust hobby, helps you out. But other folks are absolutely in terrible straits because of these challenges.
Well, I'm actually glad you make a very clear point about that price jump, because I know some realize it, but there's going to be many who watch this who watch because they're interested in hearing from designers, etc., who don't realize the in-depth details of that. So I think it's important to point out just what that difference is. One thing that you do point out that I find so interesting is you talk about that. Yes, in the end, this is very much a hobby. Yes, there's a business side, but really you love this. This is a hobby. And when you break it down, how does that experience that you do have with video games, because there is certainly an immersion that you have in video games that I think you can reflect in a similar way with board games, but they're very different genres, obviously, in their own right. So how does your experience in video games, if at all, impact some of the creative ideas and that come into the games themselves?
I think that's an interesting question. Let me see. Let me formulate here for a second. So, on one hand, so I've made a lot of games, a lot of video games, and in the course of making those games, worked lots of hours, right? So I feel like in my lifespan, I've put 2 lifespans worth of work into it. And part of that, and we're talking team sizes of 3 to 5 people, but also team sizes of 100 people on larger titles. And so one of the things that all those games and development gives you is just like a level of comfort and experience with just making stuff and dealing with stuff and managing problems and organizing tasks and sort of all that product production making stuff. And so none of that's really terrifying or scary, including marketing and all those other areas. So there's a certain amount of that piece, but also that's the production side. But on the design and creative side, similarly, experience working with artists and working with, audio is not so much for board games, but working with artists, working with designers, working with different skill sets, and sort of thinking about ways to help maximize what everyone's doing together. And then through video game playing and making, as well as board game playing and making, you just start having a really good sensibility for fun, for the player experience, for how to write a rule book. That I think is important. One of the things I've said in a couple videos, like a great unexpected benefit from doing all the game reviews, which was that initially an opportunity for just me to like try to share love of the hobby with folks to create and do, is that I just play a ton of games. It really forced me to play way more games at a much larger range than I would have normally, both in terms of like polished production AAA titles in the board game space, but also, little prototypes, first time creators, broken, wacky things, gives you a good lexicon, a good reference for things. So like, what's a good example? So I was working on the Whatnot cabinet with Steve Finn, and Steve, one of the tricks he likes to use a lot is initiative cards, where the cards will have a number on them, and every card has its own number, and if anyone plays a card, whoever plays, it's good for simultaneous resolution, but you can use the number to see who goes first. It's like an initiative in a Dungeons and Dragons game, but it's 1 to 70 instead of like 1 to 6 or 1 to 20 or whatever. And you don't roll it; it's like baked into the cards. He uses it in a ton of games, including Sunset Over Water. Though in Sunset Over Water, we turned it into Time of Day, which was like an easier thematic way of doing it, but it's the same idea. But for the Whatnot cabinet, early versions of it had that same system of, you play the action you want to do, and we look and we resolve based on that order. And it was sort of like, basically, I was like, I don't want to release. We did this like one game ago. I don't want to do it again. Like it's not broken. I feel like we did it, and so. Well, what are we going to replace it by? And that's where I was like, well, like Bruno Cathala has made a lot of games where instead of, basically the action selection is setting up a queue, and you can talk about King Domino as an example of that, but you can talk about 5 Tribes with the whatever those are, not the temples, like the shrines, whatever they are at the top, towers. And it's used in a lot of different ways, or even a Tokaido, where you have where the person in last place keeps the get going. So basically, positional action selection that sets up the answer to who has initiative, because you're going either before or in front of somebody and getting an action. And right. So we experimented with different versions and got to a version that we really liked. But it's just an example of like, had I never played any games with that kind of turn initiative solution, I might not have been able to quickly suggest it, and then we could iterate on it and make it match the current title. But it was just a different way, because the design problem was we wanted everyone to be able to go, and the result of which be, we know the new turn order. Initiatives on cards is an easy way to do that, but if you're not going to do that, what are some other ways to do that? And that was one of them.
I love that, and I love the fact that a lot of your games do have just a lot of them. They're unique, from game to game, or one might be co-op, one, and then it moves on to
Sure.
something very different. And I always think that's enjoyable, just because you still get a taste of the designer and things they enjoy, but it's also different experiences. The other thing,
not necessarily the best business decision, though. By the way,
but I will,
as an aside,
yeah, I will say there are some. I think it's interesting though. There are some obviously who stick to a certain thing, right? So there's different approaches to it. But as someone who likes to try different things, I personally enjoy it. But I think you make a good statement in the sense of maybe that's not the right business decision for all. Obviously, one thing you talked about that I will note is that turn order piece. It was very interesting. I should note recently because I played Brass Birmingham, and the turn order being based on who spent the most money goes into the last space in the next turn was a new one for me. I had never experienced that one, so that was really interesting in terms of turn order.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's all sorts of fun ways to do it. I think I haven't played Brass in a long time, and I can't remember if I played that one or the other one. But I
haven't played the other one. They may operate. They probably operate.
Which is the original one?
I think it's the is it
Lancaster?
Well, Lancaster, I believe. And Birmingham adds the beer. Is the reason I know.
Okay, so I played the remake of the original. Yeah. Or whatever, republishing of the original. Yeah, no, I mean, there's tons of amazing mechanics. I mean, like, one of the most popular videos I've done is like where I talk about different game mechanics. My biggest challenge is like I've sort of shed as many games in my vicinity as possible as like they exploded into our space. So I donate them all locally, or they're in a storage unit. So I don't actually have all my games like they used to all be behind me, and then we wanted places to live during, pandemic. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many cool things. There's so many novel ways people, because this mechanics, there are a lot of base mechanics, but what great games do typically is it's a novel combination of a couple mechanics with a theme that somehow brings it to life, that makes it feel, fresh and new. I appreciate that you mentioned that pencil first games all feel a little different and unique. Depending on what your game background is, there's some people who don't feel that way about a number of the games, right? Whether or not you're like super, some people are super informed and they'll be like, well, herbaceous is just like a simple herbiblios and blah, 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 blah. Like you have that side of it. And it's not to say that isn't true. Or you have people who are just like, well, it's set collection. It's just another set collection game. And it's sort of like people who are like the whatnot cabinet's like Sagrada. It's like, I guess, but like not if you like, not when you play them, but I think there's a, either you generalize or you just have a really good knowledge, but I don't, there's only, what is that expression? There's only 7 stories ever written, right? Like that, there's only 4 mechanics ever known to man that were ever put together or whatever.
Well, I just think it's interesting too, that again, looking at mechanics and the fact you talk about playing games to discover those different mechanics or different ways you might use mechanics. That's educating yourself in both in fun and in my opinion, but also in what you can do with design. So I personally love it. And I think it is great. I see Jamie Stegmaier was one of my first guests on the show, and Jamie talks about playing different games, and even recently speaking about sometimes there are similarities when you play a game, but there's always going to be mechanics can't be that different in the end. In the long run, worker placement will always be worker placement. But how do you decide when you're looking at the next game what you're going towards? When does that design process actually start? In the middle of another one? Is it always ongoing? Where does that kind of kick in for you, and what's coming next?
A good question. For me, I find that inspiration comes from all sorts of places, and when you're inspired, you should just chase it and have a good time with it. And so a lot of times, inspiration can come from the people you're working with. They can come from a mechanic. They can come from a theme. They can come from a piece of art. And each case and each instance, require, sort of leads down different paths. And I'll give some examples. But like when it comes to the games that Pencil First releases, right? Every single one of these games I've been a part of from like stem to stern, right? Like, every one of them, however many weeks, months, years they were in development, right? Like there is a through line, which is that I've worked on them, right? With other people, right? And I'm not trying to say there's a very strong designer who's not me. Others, all over the place. Others, I'm doing more development, or it's my design, or a different artist. But like some like really easy pencil first games examples on titles you mentioned. Herbaceous told the story a bunch of times. Beth Sobel did a skin of Bonanza with herbs that she was posting online on Facebook and other groups. That still can be found on BGD today. It was great, and I was like, that art is awesome. What was it from? And she was like, well, it was this skin. And I was like, wouldn't you consider it in like a new game? And she was like, well, you mean art like this? I mean, I was like, no, I mean that art plus or minus 3 pieces. And so we started talking. And at the time, I was like, I just want to make a game for grandmas. I just want to make a game like for like doddering grandparents who are having tea and want to play this. And originally it was I wanted to make a solo game, like solitaire with herb cards. That wasn't just this. I was reading like historic solitaire books, and I couldn't do it. I mean, I tried. I just wasn't happy with it. It was like it just turned into solitaire, and I was like, I don't want to just make a deck of herb cards. And so, by the way, I don't know if this is live. Beth Sobel, her deck of cards, which is her art, is live on Kickstarter. Check it out. But I'd been talking with Steve Finn for other reasons, and we hadn't done anything together. And I was like, hey, what do you think? You think you come up with something with these herb cards? And he was like, let me see. And like 3 days later, he like gave me Herbaceous, which was 5% from final, 10% from final, like basically there. And then it's just like an interesting circle where then I was still like lamenting not doing the solo version. And Keith Matejka was at Gen Con many years back, role player fame amongst other things. And he was like, well, I do solo design. Well, I'll take a stab at it. And then we had a cool solo mode. Yeah. So that's Herbaceous. Skull Hollow, I was with my kid, and I was doing a board game design class at their school, like an after school thing. And he was talking about a game, and he wanted a game where it was one baseball player or something versus like 10 others, or like a batter and 10 field, but you played with like 11 people. And I was like, he's like, it's got to be 11 people. And I was like, you don't want to make a game with 11 people. What if, because I'm a big Shadow of the Colossus fan, this is very thin. What if it was like one giant monster versus a bunch of other units? And he was like, okay. And so I was at like a grandparent's house, or we were like, whatever, it was a holiday, maybe Labor Day or winter holiday, I don't remember. And I just started designing it. And like, I was like, I want to have a confrontation style diamond board. I want a 3x3 grid. I want tons of small units like Foxen. I don't know if they were Foxen, but small characters, giant monsters. And the whole idea of going from the board to the monster, like that was all in that initial blast of ideation. But then like, again, in that case, I was like, I'm not succeeding in making this fun enough. Like the game wasn't good. It was an idea, but the mechanics underneath weren't supporting it the way you want. One of the things to that question earlier about like, what do you get from video games? One of the things you get from video games, which is a huge lesson I learned over time, is you're working with a lot of people who are just way better at what they do than you are. Like it's easy for a designer to like compare themselves to another board game designer and feel like they're just as good, or to armchair some writing or something like that. But like, if you're not an engineer and there's an engineer, like you're not better than the engineer. There's no question. Or an artist versus not, like, it's just like, no, there's no way. And so over time, you get used to the idea of, if you want to make something fantastic, not being offended by working with somebody who's better than you at something to make sure it's fantastic. Like, do you want to be the person who does everything, or do you want the thing that gets done to be great? And if you want the thing to be done that's great, get the best people to do the parts of it that you can afford, that are available, or whatever, who say yes. There's different ways of thinking about it. But so I was talking with Keith, and Keith engaged, Keith Matejka, and then he took over the design. I mean, fundamentally, still in line with the initial, like the seed of an idea from Ethan, my son, to like the basic framework of a thematic experience, to the game he made there. And so I have a game in development called codename Vineyard. It was a Facebook bubble popping game from a company I worked at back in the day that never came to light, that I ended up buying the rights to the art, so I had the art. But on the board game side, I wanted to make a game that had the Concordia mechanic or Spice Roads mechanic of like you have your cards, you're playing your actions from your hand, and then when you want to, you can like pick them all back up, and it's sort of like picking up. And I love it. I think it's like one of the best mechanics for games ever. And so I just wanted to make a game out of it. And like I was struggling. I worked with a number of designers who struggled with it too, which is like its own process. And then finally I found Roberta Taylor, who's doing a fantastic job with it, and I'm super excited about it. But so that was like, let's make, like I sort of was putting together these two things. So it's really Scott Caputo with the 100 Tory, one of the few games that bona fide came to Pencil First Games as not like me thinking of an idea or like approaching somebody. He was like, Pencil First Games, you do all this stuff. This is a great fit. This tile laying game. And I was like, you know, he badgered me in a nice way. And I played it with him, and it was like, you know, he's a great designer, but you know, it was like heavy and longer than I would have liked. And it was like, you know, I basically said, hey, if we're willing to work with me and take the game you have here and like simplify it down and pull out all the AP, which it still like Tori still has a lot of thinking in it, but like, whoa, it's way less than it was. And like get some characters in here. And this was the crux on that one. It just so happened that Vincent Dutrait, who's like one of the most incredible individual, incredibly talented and prolific, but like in my top 3 board game artists of all time, independently had reached out to me because he saw Herbaceous, and he said, hey, if you ever want to make a game without dragons and goblins and swords and you need an artist, like, let me know. And I basically said to Scott, I think Vincent would do this. Like, this is a game I could pitch to him that he might say yes to. If we can get the game to a point where I think it hits the zone of Pencil First Games, and he says yes, we'll do it. And we got it there, and he said yes, and we did it. So all sorts of ways things happen. I think if your mission isn't, it's about the journey, not the destination. Like if your mission isn't, I'm going to make these things, and your mission is, I'm going to make things and find joy in creation with who you work with, you know, all sorts of interesting things open up to you when you do it that way.
I love the origin though of where some of those come from. I mean, a simple conversation twists and turns into something completely different. And it's very much about those people. And you talked about the relationships earlier and wanting to form the relationship. So it really, a lot of time comes down to that. Some people you mentioned too. I mean, Beth has an example. Just right now, I see the world the board game world loves her art. And right now she's got River and Stone playing cards on Kickstarter, and I have just seen all but love for it today, and rightfully so. They look gorgeous. And I will note, because you mentioned Keith, who was so much fun to have on the show. Keith in particular, I could tell you I'm anxiously waiting my arrival of Cape May, which Keith was involved with. So
exciting.
That one definitely coming in. So some great, again, you mentioned some great people, and it is about that. It's about relationships in the end to me. And that's why I love doing this. One thing you mentioned, and really two quick questions for you before I let you go.
Sure.
You mentioned obviously family. What's the family play, or what do you like? What have you liked to play with the family over the years? What hits the table?
Well, unfortunately, like fewer and fewer things. My kids will play games, and maybe because I would always be trying to get them to try to play a game that I got from a publisher or for the game review stuff. But interestingly enough, Ethan and Evan, my 2 sons, they really, they'll play a lot of the games that you like, again, like Uno or Exploding Kittens, or like they'll play a lot of the games that like are hip. And you play Pokemon for a while, but just they haven't been as into board gaming, and certainly as I was as a kid. And I even got, like, this was a great example. We were playing Connect 4 with, like, they had kept talking about playing it at school. We played it at home, and it's fun to play Connect 4 with your kid because you can just crush them. right? Like, but so I picked up this, right? If you haven't seen Fairy Tale Inn, this is Board Gamer Connect 4. It is fantastic. This is it's semon, right? This is just incredible game, and Ethan played it. He got it. He saw his Connect 4, and he thought it was novel, but it never, it's not like a game. He's like, let's play it again.
Right.
And like, we got a game. This is Tin Robot Games. This is coming to Kickstarter at some point. Hamsters versus Hippos. They'll play with me and Emily and check it out. But like, it's unlikely. No matter how good this game is, it is unlikely that they're going to be like, "Hey, can we play that game again?" Emily, my wife, she's much more into playing games and having fun, though. Even still, has been burnt out on. When you're playing prototypes, like, unfortunately, again, being a reviewer, reviewing content, and you're getting these Kickstarters, these prototypes, right? Like, they're not typically guaranteed. Even when I buy a game, honestly, they're not like guaranteed fun. So like, to commit an even, Emily doesn't play games enough to be like if I commit an evening and the game we play sucks or is confusing or the rules are bad, whether it's a store-bought or otherwise, that like creates a delay until the next time we're going to play another board game. I think the thing that has been most successful has been escape room puzzle games. Those are all like consistent, and if they get challenging, you can take a clue. But those seem to work really well and do it. But I'm slightly saddened, but not devastated. But to admit that like our family time isn't deeply board gaming. Like I envy the deeply board gaming families. Our family time is like we're rewatching all of the Marvel MCU titles from the beginning, or Centaur World or something, or going outside and doing some other things. But the attention span / interest on the gaming at the table is not consistent enough to get some meaty games going.
I can commiserate with the Pokemon taking away, not the card game, but anything that's not, or the card game but not being played right, which I keep saying we're going to teach you the right way to play Pokemon. The important question I do want to ask, and I know that obviously as you talked to this a little bit, but for those who are looking at this industry and want to do something, and I think very much similar to you in the sense of they don't necessarily want it to be, maybe that's not necessarily going to be the full-time job, but they want to make a game. And they want to get out there and they want to just kind of get into this hobby in some way or form. What kind of advice do you give to those people?
So first, I mean, there's a video I did almost 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, called "So You Want to Make a Game?" ? And like I've watched it on occasion since then, and it's like I'm gonna still my exact opinion. I think folks, should have fun and go for it. I think very quickly, like, it turns into who are you making the game for? Like, are you just doing it to have fun and challenge yourself, and you're making the game for yourself? Then, put it in a box, put it under your bed, and don't worry about it once you're finished. If you're making it for your family, then maybe you make a couple copies on the Game Crafter and call it a day. I think it very quickly turns into a want to create mixed with a want either for spreading the experience and the joy and popularity. I don't mean popularity in that sense, but like exposure of the title, accolades, critical acclaim, or money are pretty big drivers in some combination for folks beyond the just pride or satisfaction of doing it, right? And understanding as early as possible where on that spectrum you are and what you personally in your heart need and want will help guide a lot of decisions. It'll help guide, is it worth doing a Kickstarter? Do you want to make your own company? Are you just going to pitch this? Or do you just want to play it? Like, where does that happen? But I think there's something to be said to create and make and produce something that other people can experience, and the novelty of your design or the fun you deliver. And, I think a lot of people, like, there's one version of it, which is like, get it play tested, go out, get away from people around you. A lot of that's for like market viability. But at the same time, like, if the people around you are having fun playing it and enjoying it with you, like, that can be good enough for some people. And I think it's really just, it's not greed, because there's nothing to greed for. If you don't know that, but understanding sort of what kind of satisfaction you're fantasizing about and driven towards will help, again, just make you navigate your decisions and maybe lead to success, or perhaps avoid some catastrophe financially.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I appreciate, again, you sharing that. I always ask my guests this because I do think people are interested in those topics, and I've heard that.
Oh, sure.
I'm really grateful. Again, thank you for joining and sharing all of this, sharing these stories. Obviously, I think one of the most important things for me and with this channel is the fact that, to me, board games bring joy, and I want games to be accessible, approachable, and I want people to be aware of them. And that's what the core of this channel is about. And I think you hit so much of that. So I really appreciate your time tonight. And certainly I want to encourage everyone, please go check out pencilfirstgames.com. There's a great collection of games on there. I am the first to tell you, we did a video about this, about herbaceous versus herbaceous sprout, not in a which one's better kind of way.
What's it? Yeah. What's it?
Like, what's the difference? And so you can go back on the channel and check that out too if you're interested in those ones in particular. But I really did love that. I want to note, because I didn't say this earlier, one of the reasons, by the way, I think I liked herbaceous sprouts was it had this really nice little solo mode that I just enjoyed, and that solo design in particular was just fun for me. And I really, for some reason, that I think was my little slight difference maker. I just really enjoyed it. It was a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's the one with the rival tokens, and that's another quick interesting story in that, Keith Matejka has done a lot of the solo designs for Pencil First Games because of that initial conversation we had back in the day. And Keith, Thunderworks Games is very successful. He's an entire magnitude higher, and to come and slum with us and do solo modes is pretty amazing. But what was interesting there was Steve in doing the core design really spends a lot of time trying to make sure the 2-player experience and the 3-player experience and the 4-player experience is great. And so he actually introduced the rival token system as part of making the 2-player experience better. And that really lent itself well to what Keith expanded on. So, a lot of collaboration, but, we do a lot of solo play. Actually, Jessica, who I mentioned earlier, she has a blog as well called Gameward Bound, and she plays tons of solos. Her one of the reasons she got the first opportunity at Pencil First Games was I was looking for a sales manager and with qualifications, and she wrote in, I posted a rec or whatever, a job title, and she was like, "Hey, I'm interested." And I'm like, "Well, what sort of experience do you have?" And it was like, none, right? But she was like, "But I love Pencil First Games, and actually, you may not know this, but I have the world's highest tracked solo plays of herbaceous." And like, I don't know what the number is right now, but we're talking 2,000 plays, like nuts. She's part of the soul community where they track it all, so the tracking part's not that crazy. But that, like, that's so many games. It plays quick, but and she's amazingly talented. But like at the time, it was like, oh well, all right, I have to give this person a shot because you invested so much time. So she started with small things and worked her way up, and it was great. But so even that through line, and is how Jessica got involved. So she whenever we have solo stuff, she'll take a dive in first, and I just posted Delicious, which is the next game in that family. Kickstarter next year. You have herbaceous, foliferous, and delicious, and it's gotten to the point where with the solo mode, it's like ours have the like scoring bands and how good you are. We're just like, "Hey Jessica, can you play?" Because playing for her, she's like, "Oh, I'll play 50 games." And then it's like, okay, well, she'll create, and she's also like into graph. She's very smart, but like, we'll get the distribution of points and scoring and all that. And so it's like, it's much more elaborate than like what I would have normally have done, which would have been like, I sort of feel like a good challenge level would be this number. So anyway, Solo is a big part of what we do here.
No, that's really interesting. Especially, it's crazy. 2,000 plays. I as you mentioned, I think it's like I play a lot of different games, whether it be someone sent me something or I just purchased something. I find myself constantly trying to play something new, which is probably what drives my family nuts too. It's like, oh, here's this game. I will tell you before I go, but that's why my wife has never played Fallout Shelter, because she doesn't like Fallout. And I'm like, yeah, but this is so cool. You're putting out you're putting out new worker placements, but she's like, I don't care. It's Fallout. I'm not playing it. So she won't play with me at all. But I tried really hard because I think she'd like it if it wasn't Fallout, ironically. But this has been great. I really thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. Again, I'm going to encourage everyone go to pencilfirstgames.com. The other thing I just want to let everybody know, if you do watch this before the 27th, we're going to have our first episode as part of our new programming of On the Table, where I'm going to be joined by my good buddy Ryan Espin and Anthony from Board Game Dads, and we're going to be talking about some of the games we played in the past month and some of those experiences and maybe what we're looking forward to. So just a fun, really casual conversation, and you can join the conversation with us in the chat and share some of your own stuff, and we're trying to make this a really fun live experience. So tune into that. That's 9 p.m. on September 27th. If not, you can watch that video after. Ed, anything else you want to just add before you go?
No, I mean, if you are interested in checking out our games, pencilfirstgames.com. The YouTube channel I referred to a couple of times is Gaming with Edo, which is, you could just search that on YouTube. But yeah, hopefully everyone's playing great games, and if you're looking to make something, go ahead and make it and see how it goes.
Yeah, and I will, for everyone, add links to this in the YouTube after the fact, so you'll have easy access to all of these great sites that we've mentioned. I'll make sure I get that blog for Jess in there as well, so we can put that, because we should definitely send some people over there. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for joining Creators Corner and coming aboard the Express, and I look forward to seeing all of you very soon. Have a great night, everyone.